All right, hello everyone. Thank you for coming and being a part of this FCI live series in February 2022. We do these twice a year. We'll be back in September. It's a free webinar series based on what's going on right now with startup food co-ops. Often the topics are ones you guys requested or pointed out to us there's not enough information on. So this is one of those today, and please do keep sending those concepts, those ideas, those things you wish somebody would talk about, because that's what we really base this series on. For anyone who doesn't know me, I am GQ Hannah, the Assistant Director of Food Co-op Initiative. And our guests today are going to be Bonnie Hudspeth from Neighboring Food Co-op Association and Don Moffitt from Illuminate. I'm going to have them introduce what they do just a little bit in a moment, but I want to give you some housekeeping. The chat is a very active place in these sessions. Please go ahead and use it. Put your comments and questions there. I'll be keeping an eye on those as well as the presenters, and we'll integrate them into the talk. If you see me not centering in on your question, it might just not be really close to the topic that we really want to focus on today. I don't mean to ignore you, but we're going to try and keep it to the expertise and topic that we said we would present today that people are here for. But we really would love to hear your questions. Throw them in there. Also, people tend to throw links, to each other, like, oh, Don just mentioned this. Where is that? And someone knows, and they put the link in there. Use it, and talk to each other, share information. Feel free to do that. We are recording. This recording will be put up on the Food Co-op Initiative YouTube page. We'll have those up by Monday the 28th, and we'll be sending out links, which will also be on our social media. So if you want to share what you've learned today with others, you want to go back and review it, it will be available to you. All right, that shared, we're going to go ahead and jump in. So I'm going to ask each of you just real quick. I know we're going to get mostly into project management, but I want people to have some perspective on what you do now and your knowledge based on startups before we go into the origin stories of your project management work with food co-ops. So Don, can you share with folks what you do these days?
Sure, but before I do, I'm going to take just a second to say that mostly what we're going to be talking about, and we talk about relationships with boards and so forth, are about startups. I know there's at least one operating group here, and so take it with, you have to shape it for your own circumstances. So I'm Don Moffitt, and I focus primarily on financial feasibility work and develop pro formas for my clients and work with them on the development process, and help however I can.
Excellent. And Bonnie?
And hello, everyone. I'm Bonnie Hudspeth. My pronouns are she, hers, and I work with the Neighboring Food Co-op Association, focusing on cooperative development and peer learning. And so we are a cooperative federation of more than 45 food co-ops around the northeastern United States. And we support the growth, innovation, and shared success by bringing our food co-ops and startups together.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being here. We're really going to focus in, though, of course, today about how you guys really kind of came to the food co-op world. I think for both of you, it was through project management for a startup food co-op. This topic comes up a lot with you all, and like Don so accurately point out, this is going to be through the startup co-op lens. I think there'll be plenty here to learn for those who aren't with startups who are with us, but it will be through that lens today. Can I start us off, Don? Could you tell us that origin story? What startup food co-op were you working with? What was your role as project manager, and what did you bring to the table as a project manager already, your background when you came to that project?
Right. So I didn't have any background or experience with co-ops. There was a group here in Durham that was looking to start a co-op, and I had been working for Whole Foods Market, and I'd left there, and they knew that, and so they were trying to get me to work with them, and they did. We wound up working together. But what I brought to it was years of experience as a grocery clerk, as a store manager, as a VP of operations, as a VP of store development for Whole Foods, as a regional president. So I brought operating experience. I brought the store development experience. And then I also brought an MBA with me, which I had gotten just before. Actually, I was finishing up as I started to work with Durham. So that brought in the finance side as well. So, and at that time, I had time to spare, and it was a really nice fit.
Excellent. All right, and then Bonnie, same question to you. When you got involved, you name your co-op, when you got involved, what was your background? What did you bring to being a project manager?
Yeah, well, Don and I are a great case study because all of those things he mentioned, yeah, I didn't do any of that. I did not have an MBA. I was not a store manager. I never worked in operating a food co-op. I had just finished my graduate degree in sustainable community development. It was an MS, so it was like science focused, but really I was involved in community conversations around having no year-round stable market for the 400 farmers in our county. And it was around conversations around food justice, conversations around what the future of job market was in the region where everyone graduating from college was leaving and going to Boston and going to bigger cities. So that was kind of the orientation. And I ended up serving as project manager for 4 years for the Monadnock Food Co-op in Southern New Hampshire, Keene, New Hampshire. So I did all the pre-operational development and fundraising to create this cooperatively owned grocery store. I did not have any Don skills. I learned on the go. I had never project managed before, but I'm good with people. I figured out community organizing and relational organizing, and I surrounded myself with a good team. And so I want to talk about that good team more, but maybe we can just keep building off of this.
Sounds good. Well, that takes me to, so you guys know, because you work with startups all the time, they definitely hear the message, we're going to need a project manager, but that term can mean so many different things, which we're going to get into today. Don, could you start with sharing what it meant and what was your job description? What did you actually do at your co-op?
I think that Bonnie and I kind of represent both the same sort of experiences. I'm not sure, but because I had a finger in everything. There was a time when we didn't have a treasurer, and I kept a checkbook, which is not the typical role for a project manager. I did all the major asks in the capital campaign. I sort of had my own little capital campaign going, and I helped, like I'd show up and volunteer and be on the phone bank when we were, calling members about the capital campaign. But the board was this immensely engaged group of people who they went to the farmers market, every Saturday. They were the ones that had house parties. They were the ones that were out in the community building the relationships in the community. I was building the relationships with, individuals. And then as we moved into the store itself, then it was through contacts that I had made that we eventually found the site. I negotiated the lease with an attorney. I put out the RFQ for design, the request for qualifications for architects, and then, brought the board. The board was always the final decision maker, but I brought them, like, here are the groups, here's what I think we should do through design, through equipment selection, through choosing that. Well, in our case, we worked with the landlord's contractor, but working on all those relationships and then overseeing all that work until we had a general manager. And then I worked for the general manager on the aspects of it that she wanted me to do.
Yeah, and building off of that, I think there was a lot of similarity, but what we focused on was slightly different sometimes due to our prior experience and expertise. So I feel like I was in charge of overseeing every aspect of the co-op. And little secret here, part of that was board functioning and board development. And I don't even know that that was something that was explicitly talked about. But the reality was I was the only one that was full-time. I mean, I scaled my way up. I worked very, very part-time, then part-time, and then only 1 year as a full-time project manager. But what I knew was essential was that the board understood what was going on, that we had a solid board, that all the seats were filled. And if they weren't, I was going to be involved in supporting them. And that they were getting the training and education they needed to be a good boss to me and a good boss to the future general manager. And that wasn't something that I learned that over time. And so it's something I want to pass on to you all, is that whether you're sitting on the seat as a seat on the board now, that I, as the project manager, brought forth, here's a training, who's going to the CBL 101 training? here's another, and now thanks to FCI, there's so many more resources available to startups, but I really felt it was so important to my success that the board was as updated, as educated, and as engaged as possible. And so I did, part of my job was planning with the board, you know, setting the agenda with the board president, having weekly meetings with the board president, getting out in the community. We would go out to cafes and have lunch once a week. And we would talk about how are things going, areas of responsibility, where do we need to strategize together? And then we would get like 3 or 4 people to join just by being out there and having brochures stuck in our pocket, right? And then I also oversaw the capital campaign planning. I did a ton of work on the capital campaign, so I was in charge of it, but we hired a capital campaign coordinator. It was still a lot of work. It sounds like I was slightly more involved than Dawn because she reported to me and I had to get more into it, training all the volunteers and such. And then I also oversaw finance, though luckily the board treasurer was super skilled and I could delegate that, but really it was my responsibility, right? The co-op board was trusting me that that was something that I had to take care of. Was I a financial expert? Hell no. I literally set up my college schedule to avoid any class on finances. I hated finances. I didn't understand how they were important in life beyond trying to pay my bills. And so I had to train myself. And that team that I was mentioning before, I got one-on-one training with Bill Gessner, who helped us build our pro forma. Now, that would be Dawn in this case, right? There is Dawn, there's other folks available to help you do that now. But I really had to learn as I went on some of these things. I also oversaw communications and our communication strategy. Who is the voice of our co-op? Who's going to represent that? And then also marketing and membership and volunteer management. Did I do all of these things? No, I delegated quite a bit because we had a lot of active volunteers and board members on committees. But when we did a newsletter, we had a volunteer doing the newsletter. She and I would work together doing drafts, right? And ultimately I would be the last person to see it. And sometimes the board wouldn't even look at it. So that was kind of how it worked. That might be a shift, right? For your co-op, that might be super scary concept. You might want to be much more heavily involved in that aspect of it. But what's important to say that I didn't before is that I was involved from the very beginning. I was involved on the steering committee. And so I was growing alongside with the board. And I knew when the board was formed that I didn't want to be on the board. I wanted to be on the ground being the staff. But that it did help that we grew together and learned together and went to trainings together. So I know a number of you have been established and going at it for a while. So you're in a different position, right? You already have a lot of systems figured out. So that's kind of the next thing is, well, how do you figure it out? The skills that you want covered, the things that you don't have figured out, and what you want to bring. And that's going to look different from community to community and from co-op group to co-op group.
Yeah, and real quick, and then I'm gonna let you I'm sure you got plenty to say to that. I want to balance out this story. So Bonnie, I hear you're probably 3 years part-time, 1 year full-time, 4 years in the project. Don, at what point did you come into your project and how long were you with it?
Well, I was probably with it 5 years. I was never full-time, like I was never on a full-time basis, but like Bonnie, it kind of went up and down depending on what was going on. So we found a site, we got an option on it, we were going to buy it and build, and then came the Great Recession. So, activity went up, activity went down. We did a capital campaign in there, and then there was 2 or 3 years, not a lot of activity. Then came the new site and then a burst of activity until the store opened. But I think that if you're so first of all, for everybody on the call, I think you have to back up and say, well, okay, what do we need as a project manager, right? Because the work that you assign to the project manager, and I use that term because you need to be able to manage them. You'll assign their work. The work that you assign to them is going to impact how much do they work. And one of the things that I hope that I think Bonnie and I were both talking. Bonnie, were you the one talking about, who was it? Was it you talking about your board being at the farmer's market in the snow? Somebody recently, I was talking to somebody. Oh, it was Chris. wasn't it last night, JQ?
Yep.
Chris, who's the GM at Fredericksburg, was talking about how important the commitment and engagement of his board members were from the beginning, and how they were out at the farmers market in 30-degree weather, because they were trying to make the co-op work, and how important that was. And your engagement as board members, the fact that you're here means you're engaged, and your engagement as board members is really critical. So you can't hire a project manager and then go, great, we've done our job. Right now we sit back and let them get this project over the finish line. But you have to look at your skills. I'm sorry, I'm on a roll here, Bonnie. Stop me anytime. But you know, if you look at all of the tasks that need to get done, like, and FCI has a ton of information about starting a co-op and the 3 stages of development. And if you look at all the things that need to get done and the skill sets that you have on your board and the skill sets that you're lacking, you're going to hopefully do 2 things. 1, look for board members who can bring needed skill sets into or volunteers. And 2, you start thinking about paying somebody who has skill sets that you can't otherwise find. And then you'll have a sense of how much time they need to spend on it. But I can say that I find from my financial work that very few co-ops can raise enough money to pay somebody full-time in the early stages of the development of the co-op. There's not enough work, and there's just not enough funding.
Yeah, and I'll add to that the way that we kind of meshed it together. Our project was short. It felt long, but now I know it was short and fast. It was really intense because it was 4 years of organizing. And one of those years was essentially me sitting in coffee shops, having one-on-ones with a ton of community members, convincing them that to get involved, right? So it was like 3 really intense years. And so at the beginning, it was like when we would put together packages for trying to sniff out other foundations in the community, can we get money from the city? We just always included a tiny item for a project manager. It was not enough. One of the years I worked part-time on the co-op, and we got a AmeriCorps grant through the local conservation district, because a huge part of the co-op's mission in this particular case was a year-round stable market for farmers, a place where new producers could incubate products, etc. And so I was able to spend half of my half-time job on the co-op, right? So just like getting creative about where does our mission and vision and values overlap with other community groups. And then it wasn't until the last year that I was able to get paid. And I was underpaid. I was like, what do I need to put food on my table and pay off my grad school loans, which I didn't, right? But like that, I worked at a farm so I could get a CSA share to feed myself good food while I was doing this. But I talked with Don yesterday about like, we were both underpaid. And I think that is challenging dynamic, but it was like the board understood that it was a priority. They knew they didn't have the capacity to move the project forward. And so by the time we were in year 2 or 3, they were like, we're going to figure out how to make this work. You need to fundraise for your job, get 1,000 founding member owners to join. That's the most important thing we're going to spend money on right now, besides our market study, besides our paying someone to do a pro forma, right? And so, because who else is waking up every single morning and saying, what am I going to do today to move the co-op forward with the next steps? The answer might be all of you, right? Because I've met some incredibly dedicated board members, but not just thinking that thought, but then being able to put in 4 hours or 8 hours almost every day, right? Which it gets to that point where it needs it as you get closer to opening. So yeah, I think that Don's point is a really good one. It's very challenging. And I said before something like, how can we afford a project manager? And my response is, how could you afford to not have a project manager? But then I've seen some co-ops I've seen some co-ops with incredible board members that put in so many hours in volunteer time, that was not my board. They were dedicated, they put in time, but they were professionals with jobs and kids. And they were like, there was only one retired person on our board, and everyone else was like, you tell us what we have to do. You tell us the trainings to go to. And luckily there was trust, right? And that's one thing, one little nugget that I would pass on that is crucial, is that just like with your future general manager, that there is trust and transparency and empowerment. Because if those conditions are not there, your project manager cannot do their job. And I've seen that with other startups where they hire a brilliant project manager, they don't empower them, they don't listen to them, and they're the ones that are out on the street talking to the members, pounding to the pavement, and there needs to be, is there going to be disagreement? Oh, sure. But you have to trust each other to be successful.
Bonnie, was the trust there from the very beginning? Was it something that built over time, as you engage with the board?
Great question. I mean, I think it really, for a lot of what I had to do was due diligence. If I were to make a case to the board or to just try to get the board to spend money on something or do a training, I had to make a really good case, and I had to think about what opposition would be and present it that way. And so I think trust was built over time between me and the board. And once I saw that the board would ask me questions, would disagree with me, would say, we're going to hire the local college to do a market study. That was our biggest fight. That took a while, right? To spend that first chunk of change, right? It helped me realize, like, oh, I just need to take the time. I haven't done a good enough job then explaining why this is important. So right. I think, Don, you probably had that experience too, of understanding that if you're going to present something to the board or ask them to make decisions, which you don't always do as project manager because a lot is delegated to you, but you want to have made a really solid case on, I've done the research, I've talked to JQ, I've talked to Don, I've talked to whoever else it is. Here's what we're seeing. Because you have to be able to package all the stuff that you've been doing in your part to full-time job as project manager and bring the board members along. Right. And the board members were more experienced than me. Many of them were older than me at the time, and some of them were business leaders. And so they asked really good questions. And had I not had their guidance and support and strategy, things could have gone sideways.
Yeah, I think that one of the things to think about as a board member is that, well, first of all, I'll tell you, I think this is good practice. If you wind up with a project manager, and you might not, right? Because you might look at all of the tasks that need to get done and find that you have all the volunteers that have the skill and the knowledge needed. And we can talk, if we have a minute, we can talk a little bit about the traditional approach to building with the architects and the engineers and the contractors. But if you have a project manager, you have to manage them. So a job description. Bonnie and I when we were talking about the need for like a really clear, like, this is what we want you to do, and letting them know that, like, when you want us to go a certain way, you're going to have to bring us along, right? You need to make a presentation, you need to make the arguments. And I love what Bonnie was saying. She had to anticipate the arguments against too. It's one of the reasons why the board trusted her.
Yep.
So
I have a question for you, Don. I think I'd like to ask, I see some great questions starting to show up in the chat. We'll get to those soon. Something I do want to clarify. First off, just for those who heard that, it is normal for a startup to take anywhere from 3 to 12 years to get open, and average is 5 to 7, and it's starting to shift a little higher. So just saying 4 is fast. But the other piece, Don, is there's the idea of an owner's rep, which often also gets called project manager. And so this is where a lot of blurring of lines and confusion comes in. Right. Can you explain what an owner's rep does and how that can or cannot fit into a project manager role?
So this is a great point to talk about briefly. Typically, I'm a small business owner. I want to do a project. I go to an architect, and I hire that architect, and she says to me, "What's your program?" Right. So that's my first job as a client, is to tell them, this is what I want to do in the space. That's what the program is, right? I want to have this much, it's like, how much do I want to allocate to departments? How much produce wet rack do I want to have? And you may not know the answer. So you might go to a store designer, someone like Seven Roots or Retail Planet, who can provide that kind of information. And that's all part of the program. The architect will hire the engineers traditionally and be responsible for managing the engineers. And then they'll help you with the bidding process. They'll put together the bid package. They'll pre-qualify bidders, the contractors. They'll, with me present, if I'm that small business owner, they would open the bids in a traditional relationship, and they would say, okay, this is the low bidder, but we're going to reject that bid for this reason, and this is the bid we want to accept. Then they would also be on the job site, making sure that the job got built according to the plans and specifications. And they would approve each request for payment that the contractor makes, because the contractor is going to say, I am 27% done with the project. And the architect is the one who can say, yes, that's true, or no, actually, they're not quite there yet. And the bank's going to require some of that. So then what happens if I'm like totally uncomfortable with the idea of doing what I'm supposed to do as a small business owner? I might go to a person or a firm who does that regularly. So there's like a firm in Raleigh that does project management. And what they mean by that is they'll help you put together the program, right? They'll help research all the equipment. They'll do the RFQ, request for qualifications, with the architects, and maybe even the RFP, the request for proposal, so that you select the architects and the engineers through that. And they'll work with the architects on the bidding package, on the contractors to be pre-qualified. And you pay them, and they're representing you as the owner. That's the owner's rep, but they're not involved at all in that other part of what you're doing, which is the organizational development. A lot of what Bonnie was, so much of what Bonnie was talking about that was key to the success of Monadnock was the organizational development work that she did. Convincing people to join the co-op, convincing board members to attend trainings, critical work, not the owner's rep's work. I do want to say that one approach, Fredericksburg took the approach, Fredericksburg Food Co-op in Fredericksburg, Virginia, who's been now open several months. They hired a firm that did that kind of work, but they were 45 miles away or something, and they never really felt like they got a lot of good hands-on. I talked to Rich LaRochelle there, and he was kind of like, we didn't pay that much, and it didn't work that well. In Lovettsville in Northern Virginia, they're working with one of my colleagues who's a store operations person, Garland, whose last name just escaped me. And Garland's been advising them on layout, on equipment, and things like that.
It does come in many different forms. So I want to get back to that question. And as you pointed out, at Green Top Grocery, many of you may know Katie Novak. They had someone who was basically project managing ownership growth and the capital campaign and all of that end of things. But the board actually PM'd their own project until the owner's rep. And the owner's rep then partnered with basically the board chair who was PMing the overall project on a volunteer basis. So we've seen it work a lot of different ways. But I just want to ask real quick, Don, did you actually were you the owner's rep as part of your role, or was there a separate one?
No, I served in that role.
Okay. And Bonnie, did you guys have an owner's rep, or did you serve in that role?
I served in that role, which, as we talked about the difference between Don and my skill set, I could not have done alone, right? I had no industry expertise in the grocery industry. And so that is where I brought in my team, which was meaning that we were part of the NCG Development Co-op, which no longer exists, but I was trying to push all decisions about the building and design as far into the future as possible, because we knew we'd have a general manager. I knew that the board shouldn't be making that decision. I shouldn't be making these decisions. And so I would get into the room because we had to start getting equipment before the GM was hired. So I was working with PJ Hoffman, who used to work with what is now Colluminate. And so he was there and they came for a visit, but then I would actually get them on the phone. Like I would be in a meeting with architects when we were trying to figure out which construction firm to hire. etc. And I would have him on the phone asking questions, which was important for a number of reasons. Or he was like my phone a friend. Right. I was like, see, what do you think about that? And he's like, that's nonsense. You can't have 2 entrances. You're gonna have to pay $10,000 extra a year if you have an extra entrance there for staff time. Right. He would like bring that thing in, and it was crucial. And I did not like those meetings. People treated me like crap because I was a 25-year-old woman and I was bossed around and bullied. And so I was like, who's my team? So I made the board president. I was like, you come with me to those meetings. Do not let them pull shit on us. Right. So I think that's the answer is I probably I'm amazed we did as well as we did. But had I not had that support of NCG, Colluminate, what is now Colluminate, and the board president who had business background, then it would not have been a good situation.
Okay.
And the co-op honestly could have chosen to, I probably would have recommended had I not had that. Okay, well, now let's transition. I can fade out and let's have a construction project manager come in for this phase. And I think that honestly would have worked fine as well.
I want to take some of these questions, and I think they'll lead to some more things, some more wisdom we want to get out of you guys, because these are the common questions I get, and they're not easy to answer. Burning question is, when is the right time to hire a project manager? Don, your thoughts?
So if you go, my favorite answer to every question is it depends. And if you think about what we were talking about earlier about saying, like, there's all these tasks that have to get done. What skill sets does the board have? Then you want to hire the project manager that you need when you need them. And if that is, if you're hiring somebody to be the owner's rep, if you will, not to worry about organizational development, but to worry about the store, then you probably want to have them on board somewhere around, like, as you're coming in 2B, stage 2B, where you're doing your planning work. There are some huge, big dollar decisions that are going to get made. Store layout, which will maybe, that in all likelihood will be locked in before the general manager is hired. So you have, store layout, equipment choices. Some of those can be changed with a general manager, but a lot of them will be like refrigeration may be locked in. So you want to have them on board early enough that you've been able to build a relationship so that you can trust her, and that as you, and they're able to input into it as you go along. So 2B.
If we're talking about an owner's rep style project manager. Now, right. Bonnie, I know you and I sometimes come back and forth on this. When do you think a group should bring it? I'm trying to give a different angle on when to bring in project management.
Right. I mean, like, I was there from the very beginning and ramping my way up, but it was me that got most of the member owners to join, which was a lot. Like, in retrospect, other people should have been doing that, right? That wasn't something that I uniquely needed to do. And I think some co-ops have had outreach managers, which is super great, right? Like, to have a part-time outreach manager early on that's building your membership base. Some co-ops have started hiring community organizers, right? And they call them, well, we have a new community organizer. They're in charge of membership and community conversations and input, right? So I've seen that. And I think with that model in mind, having someone that's helping to build the membership and keep that momentum up, because the momentum it helps a lot when you're building up your membership base. And so I think it really is, if you can raise the money and you can bring on a project manager that is effective at their job, because the board had an understanding with me, like, we want you on here, but if you're not hitting our membership targets, which I was creating, right? I was like, what should we be doing? Okay. Then they're like, okay, here's the target. If you don't hit it, we're not gonna be able to pay you. So that was a pretty good incentive to get members to join, right? Because so I think you could come on earlier. Now, I know a lot has changed in our world since 10 years ago when I was organizing, right? Project costs have gone way up. I also think, though, the creativity that y'all are demonstrating and innovation in terms of bringing in other funds of money, is also something to take advantage of, like SBA loans for co-ops. That didn't exist before. There's a number of ways to bring in more money to the project. And this is where I would say, if I were y'all and I was organizing for 4 years and you were on track and you were entering to maybe on the cusp of 2B, I would say, oh, let's talk about a project manager now, right? And do that research and looking out. If you're having conversations with foundations, there are secret foundations everywhere. You don't know them as a common person walking down the street, but when you start poking around, people have money and they hide it really well, and there's really good gatekeepers. But I'm like, you got to sniff that out. That was like my first year trying to sniff out, like, how do we get these foundations? Because what could be more important than getting people to channel their money into an economic engine for social justice in our communities? You know, it overlaps with so many foundations and other people's purposes. Is like, do you want a self-help tool for economic development in our community that's owned by the community? Fudge, yes, you do want that. Okay, well, we need a project manager. If we want to open in this amount of year, you tell them the deadlines and you move backwards, right? And so I would say, until you get to the equipment cost and all these things, which are money from the capital campaign is going to be going toward, thinking about bringing on a project manager if you are stalled out, right? If you have a dedicated board, you've done a good job with membership growth, but capacity wise, you're stalled out, that would be an excellent time to think about, can we bring on a project manager? And like Dawn was saying, the idea of, okay, good. Take everything project manager. It's not on us anymore. We're not going to do membership. We're not going to do this. You do everything, which I told you before was kind of my job, a little bit of everything. I would say the board, when the board thought that was the way it was going to go, I'm like, okay, well, I'm overseeing, but I'm not doing everything, right? So just having the understanding of, you are going to be delegating responsibility and you are going to be working and practicing on a really challenging job, which is, how do we oversee our first, or in your case, maybe second or third staff, and practice. Like, I started working with the board on policy governance. We wrote policies that were that made sense for a project manager versus a general manager. And then I practiced reporting to some of the policies that I could report from. And meanwhile, I was like, get yourselves trained, board, get yourselves trained. Right. And so I wasn't involved with that, but I was like, you need to get trained. And so it was kind of that give and take that was really, really good, that by the time the general manager was hired, the board had that experience too. So that's another benefit. And I don't know that you would necessarily have that role with an outreach manager, with a part-time outreach manager. Maybe I'm wrong, but I do think they don't have that much responsibility. And so it doesn't make sense to have some of those same systems in place in some cases. So would you disagree, Don, or what do you think?
No, not at all. But, I was sitting here listening to you, Bonnie, and I started worrying a little bit that, because I was thinking about, like, one of the things that you brought to your job was tremendous amount of self-initiative. And if people are listening, I think it's really important for people to realize that most of the people that they're likely to hire may not bring as much. They may not be as lit up about co-ops, or they may not bring as much self-initiative or experience. So here's some of the things I want board members to think about. And if you are a general manager, then to think about this, because a PM should be working for you. And let me say this. Bonnie and I were talking yesterday, and I think we're in agreement that the ideal is that you will hire a general manager in time who will be able, with experience, will have some experience and knowledge and be able to oversee the project management, right? So you want to start your project manager with the thought that once you hire the GM, he's going to report to her. The PM will report to the GM. If you wind up hiring a general manager who is a first-time general manager and they don't have any experience with that, you may not want to silo it that way, in which case you have to manage the relationships. And Bonnie and I were talking about with Jackie yesterday, with JQ, sorry, JQ. We were talking yesterday about, like, like one of some of the things we wanted to share with you, right? So you hire a project manager, you need to be clear, what do we want this person to do, right? And what are the deliverables, right? So that later on we can say it's working great or it's not working. Who on the board are they going to report to? They're not reporting to a group. They need to report to a person. So who's that going to be? Once you hire the project manager, like what Bonnie was talking about, her team, right? Well, who's the team that your project manager needs? What do they need help understanding the financial implications of what's going on? Do they need help understanding how to write a request for qualifications? You know, whatever they need, how are we going to get them the support that they need to have? And what level of communication do we expect? How much clarity of communication do we expect? All of that, the milestones, the work plan, these are things that the board needs to invest time in putting together so that you have a long-term successful relationship with the project manager. Because not everybody is going to be a Bonnie, and not everybody's going to be a Don. And Bonnie and I'm no Bonnie, right? If Monadnock had hired me, they'd never have gotten all of that help that Bonnie brought them on the organizational development. So.
Those are excellent points. And I'm going to stress the same thing that Bonnie and Don said, which is when to hire PM, it depends. And the other one is, are you stalled? If you've got a good board that's been doing good work and your ownership's at a decent level, but you're stalling out for capacity, that's when they get serious about it. And there have been times that I have definitely recommended to startups to take the pause from everything else they're doing and build the internal structure to hire that PM and to find the money to pay them, because they're hitting the point where the project's gonna stall. They're either there or they're real close, and it doesn't have to. It's a good project. It financially, it looks good in the pro forma. The ownership's there, the interest in the project's there, but they're stalling out. So I'm gonna definitely re-stress that. We had anyway, so another question to come in. For those of us who haven't gone through the development and construction process before, which is going to be most of you, what are the key roles for a PM in the store development process? Kind of what's the pieces they'll be doing?
Dawn, you should take this because that question really relates to more of a project manager that's overseeing construction and development, which I only did for a little bit of time. And as I mentioned before, Dawn's going to share what the things were, but I had to surround myself with a team to help with the things. So can you share a little bit more about that?
Yep. So the primary thing that a client in this development process, the co-op is the client, what the co-op needs to provide the architect is what's the program. So if you hire a person in this process, they're going to help develop the program. So they'll be, and that probably, if they were asking me, I'd say you should do that by looking at a grocery store design firm like 7 Roots or Retail Planet. UNFI also has a store services department that can do store design. Lovettsville used them. So putting together the program, which is the first stage, and then putting out a request, then figuring out how are we gonna, if you're in Southern California, which is where the question is from, you may have like 10,000 architectural firms to choose from. Well, how do you pick one, right? So that's part of the process that they'll help with. What is the process we're going to use? It could be that somebody knows somebody. It could be that there's a firm that specializes in grocery stores. It could be that the grocery store up the coast has a firm they use that they really like. So you got to figure out what's the process we're going to use. And then it's working with the architects through the rest of the process of putting together the bid package, of figuring out which contractors or how is that relationship going to be built with a contractor. Like, do you pre-qualify 6 of them and let them bid? Do you go to one and negotiate a not to exceed price? Is it a design build process? But they're going to help with all those questions. That's what you want them to do. Oh, I'm sorry. And they're going to be placing orders for equipment, right? They're actually going to, once you know, yeah, we got 16 feet of wet rack. They've got to figure out where's that coming from and how much is the co-op going to pay for it. So one of the important things you need is a list of all the equipment, that's comprehensive and priced with sources. And like in the case of refrigeration for Durham, now this was 8 years ago. Our refrigeration was probably 50% of our total equipment costs. And I bid it out. Once I had a plan, I took it to 3 different refrigeration companies. And, we sat down and specified which cases they would be pricing, the refrigeration racks and all. So that's all of what this person will be doing.
I wanted to circle back to something that was really unique about your projects, beyond the fact that you guys were just amazing project managers and your boards got very lucky, is that you guys had this wonderful balance. Quite often we see with project managers either the board, as Bonnie pointed out, doesn't fully empower them, doesn't really let them do their job, or we also see a lot of the reverse. The project manager shows up and the board goes what I call floppy. The board's like, I'm tired. We just trust you.
Right.
Please just handle it from here. It's all good. Which I think you guys as excellent project managers would say it actually would be a detriment to you in your role, much less to the whole co-op. Can you talk about how that balance was maintained? To me, it reminds me a lot of a board GM relationship, of the level of respect where the GM can talk to you as an equal and tell you where they think you're wrong and point out what needs to be done, but also is really getting real oversight and involvement. Bonnie, if you had a few words you want to add to that, and then Don as well.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, for example, when I was thinking about what all the roles that Don was talking about in terms of the construction management, and what I was talking about before is like, as project manager, I was working with the treasurer of our board, our financial working group, to plan out all the resources needed for the co-op development project, including cost for equipment, all this stuff, and helping to maintain the organizational budget and review the pro forma until the general manager took over that duty. So what you're hearing is a lot of board roles in these other, right? The board treasurer, all these other. So that's one aspect of it. The other and most important aspect is, who is that person on the board that you're going to be accountable to as project manager, or that you're going to oversee if you're the board president? It might not be the board president, but it's got to be someone who's involved in setting meeting agendas and who the rest of the board trusts and will help kind of create the culture of working in alignment and on a team with the project manager. That is crucial. And so Joe, the board president for our food co-op at the time, when he sat down and had lunch meetings with me, he was like, okay, he always made me do this like percentage. What percentage of time have you been spending on this? What percentage of time have you been spending on capital campaign, volunteer management, blah, blah, blah. So I told him one time, I was like, oh shit, I've been spending 40% of my time on managing volunteers this week. And he was like, oh, it seems like that's overwhelming because now you're feeling behind in these other areas. And I said, yep. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I've got to find a volunteer manager and train them. And I did. And they were brilliant as long as they lasted. It wasn't too long, but it was a short relief. And I think that was, sometimes as your project manager is going to be handling and juggling balls and managing a lot of pieces of the project. So to have clarity as a board on strategy, taking a step back, helping that project manager, that's one of the most valuable roles that you can play. And I think that, the board president he loved chatting with people. He was a very much people person. He liked managing people. So he and I worked really well together. The former board president might not have had that skill or desire. So if you're the board president and you don't have the skill or desire to oversee a PM in that way, then I would have the conversation. You'll know in your head, you'll immediately think of that person on your board because it's someone that likes people, likes having conversations, likes strategy, would like meeting weekly with someone, right? So I think just figuring out who is that person And how are they going to bring the strategic, bigger picture pieces of the cooperative organizational development that the board is focusing on, or even governance, and help the project manager, if they go astray or if they're spending too much time in one area, kind of ground themselves and center back.
And Don, you're in the unique situation where I think a lot of startups, if they hired you, would be just tendency to go floppy because he has so much expertise. Let's just hand this to Don. How did you guys manage that balance?
Well, you know, it's kind of a cautionary note, because when I started, you know, I was used to working for people, and I built a relationship with the board over time. So like I met regularly with the board president, and I said, I think it's time for us to talk to architectural firms. And, you know, I like sat with the board and I said, here are the architectural firms I want to invite to come and present to you. And somebody would say, well, how about this firm? And, you know, so we would narrow. So we built trust over time. And I had a good relationship with the board president. And then they left. I mean, they actually moved. And so somebody else became the board president, but things were going well and we didn't really build the same relationship. And then another person became board president who was newer, and I didn't really have the relationship with them, but everything was going along fine. And then we got some new board members, and they were suddenly like, who is this guy? And why does he have so much like authority? Why does everybody seem to like just cater to him? That's the trust, right? And by then we had the general manager. And well, actually the first meeting the general manager attended, I got ambushed by another consultant and I wound up walking. I was like, I'm done. But the general manager wasn't going to let that happen. And so I wasn't done, but I was certainly done with the board at that point. And that was because we all got complacent about the relationships. So one of the things that Bonnie and I were talking about yesterday, JQ, after you had to leave, was that keep in mind that as you build these relationships, like a relationship with the project manager, that as you bring in new board members, you need to like think about what's the orientation we have for them to get them up to speed to where we are today. And one of the things that needs to be in that orientation is, this is our project manager. This is what she's doing for us. This is why she has the authority that we've given her, so that they're not left to make stuff up in their own minds. I'm not sure I answered your question, Jake.
No,
did
I think you did. I think you did. You both are drawing to the same thing. I think we can pull from that is, you know, the relation, I mean, from both of you, is the relationship with your project manager is key, and their success is based on your investment and involvement and trust building. And so you can't just leave stuff to them. And I would think, my experience, don't leave that relationship with one board member. There's one board member meeting with them regularly, but I've also seen projects that are going well and the relationship between the person they're reporting to and the PM is going well, but the rest of the board is actually happy to be left out of the loop. I saw this in one situation, they have a lot going on, but they develop distrust of that leadership team because they've not been in the relationship. So I'd say be very careful of not letting the relationship be one person, but one person as representative of a board, and that relationship is with them as well. And
yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And the other reason to be actively involved with managing the project manager is to make sure that they understand your vision, and that
Yes.
that the direction that they're going with store design, for example, is in keeping with what you all have been working to do. One of the things I loved about Chris last night with Fredericksburg was that he talked about, like he said, I would never leave. Somebody asked him about, like, do you ever get so frustrated you want to just leave because startup pandemic? And he said, no, you know, I would never leave at this point because the board worked so hard to raise the money, and they invested so much of their time. It's when he talked about the farmers market that, you know, and I thought that was such a great vision or approach. And you need your project manager to have that same sort of sense, like, yeah, I want to help you fulfill your vision. And so management.
Yeah, and one other thing, like we didn't really get into what were our key competencies and skills. We talked about what our backgrounds were, right? But I would say one key competency and skill for both Don and I that we had in common is self-awareness. And I would add vulnerability. Don, I don't know if you feel like you you were vulnerable, but meaning from the go, I was like, look, y'all, I am not a financial expert. I'm going to need help on this. If I had bullshitted my way through that and pretended, I could have really led the project astray. I mean, they would have discovered it in a moment, but there was other pieces like that where I think having self-awareness and being able that your project manager is going to tell you when things aren't going well is really crucial. And part of that is trust and transparency, but it also needs to be set up as an expectation. And you can make that comfortableness and vulnerability by being a vulnerable leader yourself, first step, as a board president or their board liaison, but then also making it a norm of like, where are you struggling? Asking them, where are you struggling? Where do you need support? Right? As building that in, so that if there are yellow flags or red flags that come up and the project manager is over their head, that you're going to be able to kind of support them and sniff them out a little bit and make sure that they're brought to the light. And so that, first of all, their stress is relieved, they're getting the support, but also that you're keeping the project on track.
Right.
Yep. I would say number one red flag in hiring a project manager or a GM is arrogance. And so when we're speaking to that vulnerability, I have seen decent GMs turn into disasters and project managers too, because they couldn't admit what they didn't know and tell the board and work together to solve it or accept help. So I think that's something that Don, you're right, that Don, you both bring to the table is willingness to talk about what you don't know, willingness to take support and to meet the board as equals, even if sometimes you're the one with a lot more knowledge and you do have authority there, but to meet them and say, we're working on meeting your vision together. Let me talk you through that. What are your thoughts, Don?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'll say, Bonnie, I think I'm better now at being vulnerable. And I was more willing to try to hide the things that I thought I need to figure out. I need to figure this out. It wasn't so much I wanted to hide it as much as I thought, well, I'm the expert. I got to figure it out. And fortunately, things, that didn't create the problems it could have created.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm gonna wrap us up because I always do on time, which is another minute or two here. And I wanted to just have the opportunity to thank Don and thank Bonnie, who donated their time to be here, who are just in my mind, the ultimate experts on project management with Startup Food Co-op. So thank you to both of them. We're really, really grateful to them. Don, if they want to get a hold of you, can you possibly throw your email in the chat?
Sure, absolutely.
People know how to get a hold of you. Terrific. I just want to mention that we do have a couple more sessions coming up. We have one more session tonight, and we have two more tomorrow. And tonight is, I'm trying to remember. Oh, it's a really good one. Jillian Jason is going to be here talking tonight about, she does messaging by trade. That's what she does professionally. She's the board chair at Wild Onion Market. And she's going to be here talking about the terrific messaging and social presence work that she's done in the last year or so that really transformed Wild Onion Market. Their ownership went through the roof. And she's going to teach you some of her skill sets. Tomorrow, we have Patrice Lockhart-Anthony here talking about Kick-As boards, talking about how to create strong boards and diverse boards that are really getting work done. And then last Thursday evening, we will have Nikki Jackson here talking about building diversity in an inclusive way into your organization and avoiding tokenism. So those are some terrific sessions. If you haven't registered from yet, you're wondering where they are, you can go to the fci.coop website and click on events and you'll see the registration pages there. Thank you guys all so much for being here today and being a part of things. Thanks again to Bonnie and Don.
Thanks to everybody.